All right, so this is an introduction to a new topic in SQL Server known as content availability group. Content availability group, you can only configure content availability group when you are, or if you're using SQL Server 2022. There is no content availability group in SQL Server 2019 and below, or 2020, 2019 and below. So we have content availability group, we have basic availability groups, we have a distributed availability group, just so we don't get it confused. Distributed availability group is also something new, but not so new. I think it is introduced in SQL Server 2016. Then we also have domain independent availability group, which you can also consider that to be clusterless, if you will, clusterless. So we have a domain independent availability group. So, and of course, we have the traditional failover cluster and the well-known star boy, which is the availability group. So all these different types of availability group can be very confusing if you're not careful. So you can bring the concept of one availability group and try to relate it to the other if you're not careful. So distributed AG is a different concept. Content AG is a different concept. Then also for those that knows about content database, do not mistake content database to be content availability group. Content database has to do with individual database versus content availability group has to do with group of databases that you are able to make available for HA purposes or DR purposes. So you have to be very careful not to mix these two concept, content availability group and content database and content availability group. I cannot guarantee that I'm not going to refer to content database when I'm referring to content availability group. Yeah, they are content databases more like, if you will, but it's not individual within the content availability group. But that joke apart, seriously, we have a content availability group and we have content databases. So I'm here to give us high-level summary of what is in content availability group. So I have on my screen a content availability group already configured. Content availability group is, again, in SQL Server 2022. So why in the world is Microsoft introducing content availability group? Content availability group is introduced to fix certain concerns, certain issues, certain footwork that database engineer are known to be doing. So content availability group is coming to make database engineers work a lot easier. And what do I mean by that? So the concept of content availability group is to be able to fix issues like SID issues when it has to do with SQL authentication, fix issues like jobs that are associated with servers that are replicas in always in availability group. Things like link servers, certain server level objects that if you say migrate or move or fail over from one replica to the other, some of those issues that we have having to deal with SID issue, having to script the job and move it over. So instead of dealing with that, you can just cut all that chase and make yourself create a content availability group within the server infrastructure. Um, and when you do, even if you have the traditional AG, not traditional cluster here. People within the industry, they are used to traditional cluster. In this case, we now have a traditional AG because of the emergence of the content availability group. So the traditional availability group, even if you have the traditional availability group, you can also create a content availability group within the same server. Why is that possible? I know some of this, subject matter expert in what I'm talking about, mentioning that is already drawing their attention. So this video is not meant for everybody. It's not your regular video on Instagram. It is for those that understand the language that I'm using here. I assure you, they are paying close attention to what I'm saying because this is something new, not like new. I mean, this feature is in SQL Server 2022, and we are in, okay, where are we? We're in 2024 right now. So it's not completely new, but at the enterprise level, it is not widely utilized yet. Okay. So let me explain what a content availability group is and the use cases of the content availability group. First, content availability group. I just mentioned that you can create a content availability group within the same environment where you have your traditional availability group. How is that possible? And so the reason why this is possible is because the content availability group has its own master database and has its own MSDB database. I know the expert are, I can tell they're already dropping their coffee and paying a closer attention to what Berti is saying. What do I mean by a master database and MSDB database within the same server? Because I didn't say I created a different server. Within server A and server B, server A already has its own master database, MSDB model, and all of that. But the what is it called? The content availability group also have its own master database. The naming convention for the master database associated with content availability group will be or is the name of the content database underscore master and the name of the content availability group underscore MSDB. And it is created at the point of configuration, just the way you have MSDB and MSDB when you are master data file and log data file when you are creating a database. So when you're creating the content availability group, the master database, content master database, and content MSDB is created. The reason for this is to kind of isolate the workload within the content database and limit it to the master database that is designed specifically to service the content availability group. So whatever goes on within the master and the MSDB within the content availability group has nothing to do with the master and the MSDB of your main server. In the context of my explanation, see your main server as the external server and see the master within the content database as the content AG, sorry, not content database. I said I was going to be mixing these guys up, please. If you hear me say content database, everything I want to talk about here is within the context of content availability group. If for any reason I use content database, if I keep talking, so that's just me shooting more than I should do. So the master database within the context of the content AG serves the content AG and has nothing to do with the master and the MSDB of your external server. Now, when you create a content database, and so what happened is, if you have a login that has a sysadmin permission during content database configuration, all the logins that have a sysadmin, or the particular user that is configuring the content database, if that user is having a sysadmin, that login will be moved alongside with the configuration, right? So meaning that if you have sysadmin login, as soon as you're done configuring the content database, that login will be available. So you will be able to use the power of the sysadmin that you have to continue with other configuration that you need to do within the content availability group. Now, any other lower level permission will not be migrated or will not be moved when the content availability group is created. So once the login with the SA admin is within the AG, you've now succeeded in separating your main server, which is the external server, from your content AG server. So consider the content availability group as a different entity, a different server on its own, versus your external server, which is like the motherboard. So once you arrive at the content environment, let's say, for example, before you configure the content availability group, you have a sample database like AdventureWorks 2022, and let's say TestDB database. This is just as an example. So you take the full backup and the transaction log backup of the two databases, for example, and which is the basic prerequisite that you must have to be able to qualify those databases to be able to make it to the availability group. So when you have these two sample databases available and you start the wizard, you will be able to add those databases just the way you normally do on the traditional availability group. But there is something when you are doing that within the wizard, there is an option that allows you to go for a clusterless kind of configuration. And there is also an option for you to pick an existing cluster. Let's say you have a WSFC or cluster already configured with quorum and all of that. Yes, you can use that. So so you can use that to be able to have a cluster-based content availability group and a clusterless, which in my opinion, is also, you can also refer to the clusterless to be a domain independent availability group, which is a different concept altogether. So once you make your choice, clusterless or with a cluster, however, you will be able to create. So this is not a demo. This is for the subject matter expert, right? They understand what I'm saying. So once you are able to do that, you will be able to do the normal thing that you know on the regular AG, and content availability group is created. Once it is done, for example, if you look at my screen, if you can zoom in, I have availability groups folder here. And within here, I have content AG primary on this server for us to in this particular example. And of course, once you do, there is a database that is created that is called Content AG Master and Content AG MSDB. And the two sample databases that you pick will be added. So on my right, you can see my dashboard looks all, green and all of that. So now, when the content database is created, what happened is any login that you create on your external server will not automatically be able to access the databases or access your content database, right? It will not be able to automatically do that. And any login that you create within the content database, from that moment going forward, will be able to access and your content availability group. If you create that login within the context of the content availability group, now you must create a listener. And when you're making connection within the context of content availability group, you must use a listener to make the connection. And let me explain why that is important. If you create a listener and make a connection using the listener, you are guaranteed that you are making the connection to the primary of the content availability group at that particular time. And also, you are also guaranteed whatever permission, whatever login, whatever server level object that you've created that is supposed to serve the content availability group, because you make the connection using the listener for the listener, the content availability group listener, you will be able to make that connection and be guaranteed that you will be able to access both the primary and the secondary replica of the content availability group. But let's look at a scenario where you have the listener, but you choose not to connect using the listener in the context of the content availability group, and you choose to go and connect to the individual member replica of the content availability group. That connection will not allow you to have all of the privileges. As a matter of fact, in that context, you are not connecting to the content availability group. So you have to be aware of that connecting using the listener of the content availability group is essential. So again, if you have, say, if you create a link server within the content availability group, if you create jobs, if you create login users, whatever it is that you create within the context of the content AG, it stays within the content AG. And so that's the beauty of it. There are so many use cases of the content availability group, so many of them. The concept of the content availability group, your usage of that feature, you need to be creative to be able to, exploit other ways of using the content availability group. But since this is a summary, I would like to mention one that is interesting to me, which is, let's say, for example, you have an application that uses a CZMin for whatever weird reason, right? CZMin is the biggest permission that we have within any server infrastructure. And a particular application, let's say Bank of America, for example, have an application that requires a CZMin to run. As a database engineer, a cloud solution architect, just imagine how the panic mode you will be in, knowing that there is an application within your environment that is having a CZMin. That is not a good feeling. So here is where content availability group can fix that concern. So if you have such issue, all you need to do is create a content availability group or add that database to a content availability group and happily grant the CZMin. When you do, the CZMin power is within the context of the content availability group. If that same user connect to the external server and try to, that CZMin privilege cannot cross to your main server. It stays within the context of the content availability group. This particular scenario is one of my favorite. There are so many use cases for content availability groups. So look forward to an extensive explanation as regard this particular feature in SQL Server 2022 on our on MPIT YouTube channel. So I will be coming up with series of short video um, uh, on different topics in the coming videos and on other topics that I will that people within the industry that are interested in what I'm sharing will benefit from. All right, so this is what I wanted to share as far as content availability group is concerned. Okay, I hope this helps.